Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is a conversation around post-convention hauls. Gencon 2024 has come and gone, and with it has come the usual spat of photos all over social media with tons and tons, an absolute ton of games, and the usual conversations around them. People engaging in those photos, people liking those photos, commenting, asking about games, this, that, the other. How can you play so many games? How can you afford so many games? Some people ask questions like that, and others just interested in the games themselves. Which is your favorite game? Why did you get those games? Which games are you going to play next? What do you do with all these games? There's any number of conversations around these photos. And it's not just photos, it's also content creators showing their hauls and videos of, the 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 games they came back from Gen Con with. There are tons and tons of haul content out there. From individuals, from people in the industry, there's a lot of showcasing of the vast amount of board games that have come out at Gen Con, and any single one of these hauls is still only a small smattering, a selection of the available games at this Gen Con. The Board Game Geek preview list for Gen Con 2024 had something like 650 games by the time all was said and done. And keep in mind, that doesn't even count all the games available at Gen Con. That just counts the things that are like new or newsworthy or in some way being showcased. There are so many other things there because every single vendor comes, every single company, publisher comes with their whole catalog or as many relevant titles from the catalog as they possibly can. There are board game stores left, right, and center selling full catalogs full of games. There's individual trading lists and buying and selling of used games, allowing you to have an absolute ton of games available for sale at Gen Con. Tons of games that people can come back with, tons of games that can enter a haul video, and that's when the conversation starts around these haul videos, around the person who came back with 87 games, and whether or not it's reasonable, okay, whether or not it makes sense, is it FOMO-inducing. There's a lot of interest in these hauls, but there's also a lot of frustration around them. And that's what this video is about. Because I think the frustration is reasonable. But I also think the reasons for these haul videos or posts to exist is also reasonable. And so I just wanted to have a little bit of a conversation around these things. Because I think that there are so many reasonable viewpoints on all sides that I wanted to dive into it a bit. And I'll start with the negative aspect of hauls, because I do think there are negative aspects of hauls. I think there's something about watching someone come back with 100 games that is a little bit of a weird taste in your mouth. And I'm saying this as somebody who has a Gen Con haul video. I don't remember the exact amount, but there's a Gen Con haul video on this channel of something around 70 games or so of that video, like 65, 70, I don't know exactly how many there are, but there are a lot of games that I came back from Gen Con with, a lot of games that I came back to cover, and we'll talk about it because this is something that's relevant to both people in the industry as well as individuals. But regardless of which side you are on, regardless of why you're posting some sort of haul content, there's still something slightly icky about it. Because hauls are FOMO-inducing. At the very basic, a haul photo, a haul discussion, a haul video, showing the amount of games you came back with from any of these conventions, regardless of which one it is, Gen Con and Essen tend to be the biggest offenders. I would argue Gen Con more so, because Gen Con, a lot more people can actually drive. Essen, a lot more people are actually flying there, which just means that having 80 games is, well, however many you think 80 games is, imagine the shipping cost of shipping 80 games back from Essen. Those games aren't free or they're not cheap. They're expensive as anything. It is a nightmare. But let's focus on just hauls in general. And hauls are FOMO-inducing. Hauls do create a desire for others to want something that they didn't necessarily feel the need of before. You may have avoided Gen Con, you may not have gone to Gen Con, you may not have been able to afford to go to Gen Con, and suddenly you see a photo show up in your feed with 80 games in it, and you're like, this feels like a lot. This feels like something that makes me want games that I didn't know I wanted. It makes me feel left out because I was lucky to buy 2 games this month, and I felt good about that until I saw your 80 games. They feel precocious, inherently in the nature of a haul. Whether you are in the industry or whether you're just an individual, something about a haul feels precocious. It feels like, look at all this stuff I came back with. Look at all these things that I have. And it's not necessarily inherently a look what I have that you don't. But I think whenever you have something that is expensive or hard to attain, I think whenever you even start the conversation of look what I have, there is almost an implied and you don't in that. It may not be intended, but we all know it's true. A lot of people, there's very few people that can afford to come back from a board game convention with 80 games. That is just not a viable option for most people. And so whether or not intended, whether or not it's something you wish you could avoid, the and you don't is implied and they inherently feel precocious. They incentivize others to spend money that they might not have otherwise. Because again, those 2 games you got this month and you thought you had a great amount of self-control, you're very happy. You're actually managing to cut back on your spending, and you're enjoying the board game hobby with all the games you already have that you aren't playing enough, and so you're being much more conservative with what you buy. And suddenly there's an incentive and a desire to feel like, well, I just want to get more. I wouldn't even go crazy. I don't even need 80 games, but 10 games? 10 games is not so unreasonable. Whether you go online and buy those 10 games, or whether the next time you go to a convention, you buy games you wouldn't have otherwise, there is that aspect of the incentivization of spending that might not otherwise have taken place. And all of this leads to a commercialization of the hobby. It feels like there's a commercialization of the hobby. Because there is this implied way, this implied aspect in the hobby of how you're supposed to spend your time. Are you supposed to collect games? Are you supposed to play games? How many games are you allowed to have? There's so many different conversations around what the right way to engage in the hobby is. But when you see this many games being purchased, again, if you come back with 80 games from Gencon, even if you buy nothing else the entire year, even if you buy not a single other game the entire year, that still means you're learning a new game every 4 days. Every 4.5 days. Every 4.5 days you're learning a new game. That's an insane amount of games to be learning, to be playing. It feels like the commercialization of the hobby. No reasonable person needs that many games. No reasonable person should be playing or going through that many games, and this all encourages and incentivizes the cult of the new. It's not about playing the games you know you love. It's not about finding those old classic titles you haven't had a chance to play. It's about the cult of the new. It's about the new things that are constantly coming out, and it's about that. Which is why that these halls, again, regardless of the format that they show up in, can feel frustrating to those who aren't engaging in this commercialization, who aren't engaging in this level of consumerism around the hobby. These can all be frustrating to those people. Before we get into some of the things you can tell yourself or think about, it's also worth knowing that people do enjoy seeing hauls. Something I've talked a lot about on this channel is the fact that you can never make everyone happy. You always have to figure out who you're trying to speak to, as well as yourself. Yourself is a big part of this mix, and that's more relevant if you're in media, but regardless of who you are, whether you're a random person on a Facebook post, whether you're a person in the industry, you're always trying to be mindful of the different voices and the different people, because people do enjoy seeing haul photos. There are those that don't. There are those that, for all the reasons above, it is a frustrating experience with a bit of an ick factor to it, and feels precocious and commercialization and all those things. That's definitely true. But there are also people who enjoy it. These conversations, or these posts on Facebook, they almost always do better than anything else out there. They have higher engagement, they have higher likes, they have higher click-throughs. And engagement versus likes is important, because engagement could just be people complaining that these haul pictures even exist, but most of the comments aren't that. If you look through any of the comments on these, most of the comments are like, cool, awesome, enjoy, have like whatever it is. They're more general engagement around, it's cool that you have these cool things. Oh, how is that game? I want to pick it up. Did you manage to get this, this, or this? There's a lot of conversation around these things. People do enjoy it, and the engagement around them is better, which means as much as it might be frustrating for you to see it, understand that the high level of engagement and the high amount of likes does mean that these hauls are speaking to someone. This is content that somebody else does enjoy consuming, regardless of the reason why. Maybe you want to see what other people have picked up. Maybe you're one of the people who posted the hauls, and it's fun to see what other people have picked up. Maybe you're someone who just likes to see what's hot and new. It tends to show people. These haul things, they tend to show people what's popular there. And again, that's why there's high engagement. That's why they perform well on YouTube, they perform well on Instagram, they perform well on Facebook. They generally just perform well across the board. There's a high level of engagement. There's a high level of satisfaction of people being able to live vicariously through someone doing this. There is something a little fun about watching someone have 80 games, knowing that you're far too responsible to ever engage in that kind of behavior. Because again, when you're frustrated by these things, there's a little bit of judgment in that frustration too. Usually. There's a little bit of almost like, I wish I was, but either I can't, or I don't want to, or I don't think it's a responsible use of money. But being able to live vicariously through someone who's posting a haul photo, being able to see all the games, those that you want and those that you have no interest in, because I guarantee you every single haul photo you've ever seen, except for your own, has a ton of games that you have no interest in playing. And so your frustration should be tempered with the knowledge that you don't even want that haul. You don't even want that full amount. But they tend to show people as popular. They tend to be a quick snapshot of the convention for those who didn't go. As you browse through haul photo after haul photo, as you watch videos from your favorite content creators and you see certain games pop up again and again, it is a quick snapshot for those who haven't been monitoring, haven't been paying attention, who didn't go to Gen Con, didn't look at the hotness list. And if you want to get a a sense of what's currently trending in the board game space, these haul videos can be illuminating for that. They can be useful to give you that snapshot, that glimpse of the current hotness in the board game hobby. They also even encourage a counterculture. They encourage counterculture, like the amount of photos. I love seeing photos from people who are like, hey, here's my Gen Con haul, and it's 5 games. Or here's my Gen Con haul, and it's a photo of all the money you save by not buying games. There's a lot of counterculture in the humor and the memes, and they're just the sheer responsibility of a small haul. Showing, hey, by the way, these are the 2 games I bought, and this is the 1 game that I demoed, or whatever it is. There is something satisfying about seeing that. What's the word for when you have a small home living? That minimalism, the minimalism aspect of the hobby. And so that's another fun aspect of these hauls. But ultimately when you're browsing on Facebook and you see a haul and you're frustrated by it, or you're watching a video from your favorite content creator and you see this flagrant exhibition of the consumerism of our hobby, there's several things to keep in mind. Because everyone has a different experience. Everyone has a different reason as to why they were doing that. Whether you're a person in the industry who's, again, there's different kinds of people. There's people who demo games for Board Game Geek and they come back with hundreds of games because they're demoing games for Board Game Geek. They're putting in the hotness library of Board Game Geek, all that. There's content creators who are covering these games. These games are actively homework for them, as much as they're fun. And it is fun. Make no mistake, it is fun to have a bunch of free games. It is. But it's also a homework assignment. There's a bill that comes due on those games because now you have to play them. And you do have to play them. If you're someone who's gotten these games and you're in the industry, there usually is a pressure to play those things. And if you're someone who just spent money on those games, the pressure is less there, but the amount of money that you had before and the amount of money you have now, there is a difference there. Everyone has a different way that they're operating. Some people just have a ton of money and they spend it on the things that they want because they can afford to. Others don't have a ton of money, but they save up every single year, and this thing that you're doing every single month, or whatever it is you're doing, you're going out to the theater, you're going out to the movies, you're going out to the soccer stadium, you're going out to the theater, whatever, anything you're doing any single month, there are people who save up every single year, and this is the thing that they do. This is the hobby that they spend money on. This is how they have a real, true experience that lives throughout the year. Every single time they play a game, they are able to enjoy and remember the time they went to Gen Con, and that's where they spend their money. We all spend money on different things. We all have different vices, and board games, as expensive as they can be, are still a somewhat reasonable vice. But nonetheless, when you're looking at these photos, when you're watching these videos, there are a few things to keep in mind. Hauls are expensive. They are. If you come back with 80 games at a reasonable average, a reasonable conservative average of $30 a game, that's going to be $2,400 that you're spending on this. That's a lot of money spending on a stack of board games. And if you think it's irresponsible, then be proud of your responsibility. If you think it's not something you would do, be proud of the choice that you're making and live vicariously through it. At the end of the day, if there is disagreement with the choice, you should be happy with the choice you're making. You should be happy with what you're deciding to do. It just makes sense. So live vicariously through them and be happy with the decision you're making along the way. Hauls are homework. This is for sure true if you're a content creator. It's also true if you're an individual. Again, if you're getting 80 games every single Gen Con, you're either just a collector at that point, or you are going through them and playing them, which means hauls are homework. And I guarantee you this, if you play the best games in your collection day in and day out versus the person who comes back from Gen Con with 80 games, regardless of who they are, amongst those 80 games, there are some real gems. There are. But there are also tons of mediocre, forgettable games that now have to be played, either from an internal sense of pressure or an external sense of pressure, but there's a lot of homework involved in playing all the newest games. It takes a different kind of personality or a job within the industry for you to prioritize playing all these new games. And remember that when you're looking at this photo. That photo does have a shoe that's dropping on the other side, something that's going to catch up with. Hauls push Cult of the New, they do, but I have said time and time again that if you want to enjoy the hobby in the most conservative, responsible way possible, live 2 years behind the Cult of the New. Don't play the Cult of the New, don't engage in Cult of the New, because I guarantee you the good games are still there 2 years later, and so whenever you see a game that is the current hotness, whether it's Harmonies right now, Harmonies is doing really well, whether it's, Rock Hard 1977, whether it's Planto Nubo, whatever that game is that is the current zeitgeist, the current hotness that is currently calling you. And because amongst that Gen Con haul, there's a bunch of them. I guarantee you there's 10 games that are calling your name that you wish you owned. But I also guarantee that if you wait 2 years, only 1 or 2 of those games will be as relevant as they are today. Most games go through a period of temporary interest when they enter the board game space as everyone tries to try them out, and then most games settle outside that realm of interest. Most games do not stick around for 2 years. If you want to find the modern classics, if you want to save money and buy and play the best of the best, live 2 years behind the Cult of the New, and every single haul, video, or post is always living with inside the Cult of the New with the costs that come with that. Before I got into content creation, I generally tried to play games that were established. I played Blood Rage 2 years after it was popular. I played Terraforming Mars 2 years after it was popular. I played Spirit Island 2 years after it was popular. The hottest and best games, I waited until they were stuck in the board game ecosystem before I dabbled in them. And that means I avoided all those other games that you and I have forgotten about that weren't worth remembering. Living 2 years behind everyone else can be really helpful for your wallet and your game time. If the haul, video, or post you're watching is from someone in the industry, make no mistake, hauls, especially when you paid very little for them, are definitely a perk of the job. They're definitely a perk of being in the board game industry. There's no two ways about it. It is, if you love board games, and I love board games, it is fun to be able to have a large stack of board games. There is homework attached to that, but more than the fact that there's homework attached to it, forget the homework for a second. Forget any sense of responsibility that comes with it. There's also the aspect that if you're in the industry, it's a perk of the job. But being in the board game industry is usually a good way to get paid a whole lot less for a whole lot more work. This is a passion-driven industry. And so this is not true for everyone, make no mistake, but for many of you watching this, many of you who are set at the halls, you're almost certainly making more at your day job than someone in the board game industry is making at theirs. It is an industry that relies on passion, and sometimes a portion of your pay is coming in passion. That's another thing to remember. And at the end of the day, the biggest thing to remember when you're looking through a haul video or reading a haul post and you're just sitting there being frustrated with the sheer sense of commercialism and precociousness of it all is don't yuck on someone else's yum. Don't be frustrated. Don't find a reason to dish on something someone else is getting joy out of. Even if that joy comes with a sense of why do you have to share it? Why do you have to show it to everyone else in a way that makes everyone else feel like they don't have it? At the end of the day, there is passion behind it. There is a love for board games, the love that you and they share. Don't let the ugly little green guy on your shoulder win. Just move on. You don't have to like, you don't have to comment, you don't have to engage, and arguably if you don't like, comment, or engage, they become less involved. The more you like, the more you comment, the more they show up for everyone else, and the more it incentivizes these to be a thing that you can mentally tell yourself, well, no, people like it, people enjoy it, people engage with it. You can just move on. Because I guarantee you that they're not always present. Most of the time, your Facebook feed is safe from haul videos or haul posts. Most of the time. There's a few moments every single year where they show up briefly. And just like a bad cold, they briefly go away. Well, they show up briefly and then quickly go away. If you do like it, great. Engage. Comment. Say something. Ask a question. Questions are always fun. Is there a game you wanted to pick up that you weren't able to? That's a great question. Such an engaging question. And it's interesting too. It's interesting to know the answer. Like, if this is all the stuff you got, what is it that you wanted to get on top of it? But if you don't like it, it's easy enough to just scroll on past and find something else that is adding and enjoying, something else that is adding and enhancing your hobby. That's basically haul videos. They show up, they go away, and then the board game hobby returns to normal. Although they have homework to get through. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radko from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.